some wonderful panelists that I'm going to invite up to deepen the conversation around equity, and I'd like to invite them, and as they're coming up, and our screens are rolling up, I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to them. They are each really remarkable leaders in our community and are working on this whole issue of equity because they're acting on it, they're working on it. And that's what I love about having them on our panel today. And I'm going to, as they're coming up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Sandra Samuels is the president and CEO of the Northside Achievement Zone. Sandra is really leading kind of revolutionary change in North Minneapolis. She's really focusing on multi-generational poverty and ending that by a birth to graduation approach to education. She's working in collaboration with 35 different nonprofits and schools, and their single goal is to prepare 2,500 low-income North Minneapolis children to graduate from high school and be ready for college. And they're supporting parents. She's a national leader. She's worked on this issue a lot, and I know she'll have a lot to say. And then I'm also excited to introduce to you Rapa Makah. Rapa is on my immediate right. He is the president and CEO of Nexus Community Partners, and that is a community building organization that serves as an intermediary. It helps to build capacity within community-based organizations. And they are engaging communities of color to achieve equitable and sustainable development in the Twin Cities region. Rapa has more than 25 years of experience in community-based leadership and wealth building strategies. He's been a member of our policy board of the Quarters of Opportunity, which is now migrating to be called the Partnership for Regional Opportunity, and he is co-chairing along with Commissioner Jim McDonough one of our working groups called Regional Equity and Community Engagement. So we're welcome Rapa. And then Bill McKinney on the end is the Vice President of Talent and Long-Term Development for Thrivent Financial. He's been at Thrivent for 11 years. He's led a variety of business groups at Thrivent, strategy and research development, and most recently talent and change management in the organization. And what he is really working on is effectively leveraging Thrivent's ability to keep changing and responding to the community as it grows its business. His boss, Brad Hewitt, the CEO at Thrivent, and Mike Hang, the CEO and president of Wilder Foundation, are leading a work group with the Itasca project called the Socioeconomic Disparities Project, and Bill is deeply involved in that work as well. So give them a big welcome. Thank you. So Bill, let me start with you. Equity as a growth model. From your perspective, why is that important for the long-term viability of our region?
I'll speak from from both the Itasca project work as well as Thrivent. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Itasca, Itasca is a group of CEOs, civic leaders, government leaders committed to making the Twin Cities a great place to live. It's an informal group. It doesn't have lots of staff. It doesn't have a big budget. It's essentially a voluntary association of leaders trying to make a difference. And the three issues that they really have focused on over the last 10 years are education, transportation, and jobs. And at the intersection of those three, they've realized, like all the rest of us, like the rest of you have, that disparities play a really big role in our ability to succeed as a region. And so about 8 years ago, they took a run at this issue of disparities and said, how can we make a difference? And came out with a blueprint, came out with a plan, and then 2008 came along, and the situation actually didn't get better. The situation has gotten worse, which you listen to the numbers and you think, how could that possibly be? But it's true. And so we've taken another run at it, and what's come out of it is really two things that we're focused on. One is to get large employers committed to actually moving the ball. And there are some that have done a great job, and there are others like us who are really just getting started at helping to address the problem. And then the second one is, how do you raise the issue and the awareness of a broader group of people about the challenge? And I think R.T. Ryback has been part of our group along the way and really said it best, which is this really isn't about, it's about addressing a problem, but it's more about capturing an opportunity, because as a region, we are going to look a lot different than we did. And if we don't figure out how to capture this opportunity, it's exactly the same problem that companies face if they don't respond to the changing face of the marketplace. So that's how we think about it.
Thank you. How about you, Sandra? Why do you think it's important for economic competitiveness?
Yeah, I want to start with, and thank you, by the way, Susan. I just love that the Met Council is thinking regionally and acting equitably. Just major.
Thank you.
So I'm a quote girl, so I want to start with a quote. Madiba Mandela, who still lives through his words and action, said, like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by actions of human beings. And so as we think of North Minneapolis, the area that I live and represent, and am raising 3 girls and a husband, a dog, a guinea pig, and a cat. Not raising the husband, but right, trying to. But you know, we've seen, it is really the vortex of most disparities. I mean, where the heart of it is really happening in terms of the storm of our region. And we are there working with a number of organizations. In fact, 37, there's a couple of partners here in the room. If you could wave your hands if you're here, thank you. And we are saying that we have to address these issues because there are underperforming assets in North Minneapolis, both in homes, the value of homes. You know, we've been living there for like 17 years, and we are way underwater. Most of my neighbors are, whether they're middle class or low income, as long as they're homeowners, they are. It's a tax that we pay for living there. And because we pay really little in taxes, other areas of the city have to pay more. And if it were more equitable and our home prices were up more and we weren't underwater, then we would all be sharing the weight equitably. But the main thing is that you know, we in North Minneapolis are really modeling ourselves after Harlem Children's Zone in New York. And in fact, how many of you are familiar with Jeffrey Canada and Harlem Children's Zone? In fact, last year we brought Jeff Canada, because he has done extensive writing around how their region in New York really took on these disparities and have transformed central Harlem at least. He shows footage of what buildings look like. So it really got into bricks and mortar 20 years ago, before they started really addressing the disparities, the heart of that being education, education, education. And we actually got a number of CEOs, I think some are in the room today, and asked them to come meet with Jeff last year to talk about how addressing disparities there have made a difference. And so Central Harlem, if any of you have been there recently, is not the same place it was 20 years ago. In fact, one of the challenges that I think we'll have to address, because we will be successful in this regional development, is that many of the low-income residents that were part of Harlem Children's Zone no longer can afford to live in Harlem. The market prices have gone up so significantly. There's even a Banana Republic in Central Harlem. And we don't necessarily need a Banana Republic in North Minneapolis, but we do need some strong businesses. But again, education, 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 and I want to talk more about that, how we are trying to do what we are doing, what then Senator Obama said about 8 years ago, that if poverty is a disease that infects an entire community, and I would argue a region, in the form of low housing prices and availability, poor transportation, disproportionate violence, poverty, and failing schools, and disproportionate violence, that you can't heal it in isolation. You actually have to heal the whole thing by lifting up what works. And that's how I think we really will address this issue and do it successfully. And it's been done in other parts of the country.
Thank you. Rapa, how about you? You've worked in this field for a long time. I mean, how do you think we can translate what we need to do on a community-based level and lift it up to a regional level?
Well, I'm happy to be here. Good morning. I think earlier you were called a hardy group of people. I'm hardy too, but it's cold. All right. Just so that we get that straight. Hey, I just want to follow up a little bit on something that Bill said about where we're going and shift it slightly in terms of where we're at. The demographic shift that we're in right now is not a philosophy, it's not a perspective, it's not a political point of view, it's a reality. In many ways, many ways, no pun intended, that train has left the station, right? And if we think about a person born 30 years ago, they were born into a country where 80% of its population was white. That 30-year-old today is facing a completely different environment. And by 2040, when they're turning to retirement, less than 50% of the population will be white. That means that we're moving to a country, a nation, that's majority of color. In 2040, 42% of our region will be people of color. So that's not ifs and ands or maybes or could be's or ought to be's. That's the real deal, right? So when we're looking into the future in terms of economic competitiveness, and we're looking at our greatest challenges, as well as our greatest opportunities, it is that diversity that exists in this region that will be the bed seed that nurtures the possibilities that exist for us. And it is that kind of innovation, adaptability, and connectivity locally, nationally, and internationally that I think is going to be critical in the future, and it's going to take that rich diversity to move us to what will be the next era of economic prosperity. Either we invest or we regress. There's no place to.
Thank you. Sandra, I have a question. You've really worked on a place-based strategy in your work. So what types of investment should we be thinking about? How do we do this to scale, not just in North Minneapolis, but in the other RCAPs in the region? And how do we connect people to opportunities? What do you see as promising?
Yeah, and Susan, can I just piggyback on Rapad just a little bit? So our place-based strategy, our mission is to create a culture of achievement in a geographic zone of North Minneapolis where all children graduate high school college ready. And we're using education as a lever. Our goal is to end multi-generational poverty as we know it, again, using education. And the reason it's so important for the region, in terms of some of the numbers that Rapah talked about, and Todd Klingel is here, and we've talked about this quite extensively in terms of the zone, but as well as the region. It's just that last year, for the first time, of comparison of four-year high school graduation rates were done across the country where they used the same measure. And what they found was Minnesota came in second to last in graduating African-American students in 4 years, came in dead last of all the states. Only Nevada beat us with their African-American students. I want to find out what's happening there. And then dead last with Latino and American Indian students of all in the entire country. And then when we look at who our youngest citizens are, here in Ramsey County, 50% of the children 0 to 5 today are children of color, in line with what Rapad was talking about. In Hennepin County, we're getting very close to 50%. And so when you look, in Minneapolis, African-American children, scholars we call them, are only graduating at a 37% graduation rate. You don't build an economy on that. And in fact, what we keep talking about is one of the reasons, I think, Susan, you mentioned that we have 18 corporations here today, Fortune 500. Well, they're not here because of our beachfront property, right? They're here because we've had an educated workforce. So if we just do the math, we are running into a tragic collision with what's happening today, unless we address education. And so within the zone, what we're doing is we have family engagement at the center, where parents are leaders. We have 556 families who are engaged in the Northside Achievement Zone. And again, this culture of achievement, working with over 37 partners, nonprofits, city officials, Hennepin County, so on and so forth. And we have erected an education pipeline as well as a whole family support pipeline. You need both, right? And so the education pipeline, we're working with partners from early childhood, from the womb to work, early childhood, our K through 12 partners, expanded learning, mentoring, and college, of course, all getting together, looking for outcomes and strategies for the same families and the same scholars. And then the whole family support is so that ACEs are removed from children's lives, adverse childhood experiences. And so we are working with career financial pathway organizations to make sure these families who have been stuck in generational poverty, again, very man-made, so that they can break out of that and look for not just a job, but also a career. And then they're working with housing organizations. A huge, huge issue in our neighborhood. I don't know if anybody saw the article that was written in yesterday's paper about how North Minneapolis has been disproportionately hit by the foreclosures. Nobody feels it more than our families. And the house they highlighted yesterday on Hillside Avenue is one that is about 5 houses up from Don and I. And it was one that was, 7 years ago worth $50,000, then it went up to $65,000. Then at the height of the foreclosure crisis, it went to $290,000, and just recently sold for $46,000, and to an investor. And I think the investor said something really prophetic, because we always complain about the slumlords, and many of them are slumlords. The jury is out for this one, but I could kind of tell you. But anyway, that we complain that the investors are taking over, and what he said, I think, pretty appropriately is, it's not just that investors are taking over, it's that people are unwilling to move to North Minneapolis and live in a place and be part of the transformation. And that's what the zone is doing, working with, again, 556 families, changing everything about their lives all at once, parenting, education, and all of the services that we're doing wrap around. And all of our partners are using the same web-based tool, so that we're communicating about the same families and the same scholars. And they're on a trajectory and they're on a plan. So we have a 2-generation approach, Susan, and I think what we're doing in Minneapolis, in North Minneapolis, can be scaled up anywhere. It's happening here in St. Paul as well, with the St. Paul Promise neighborhood. It's happening in 61 communities around the country. And really the thing that's scalable are the best practices. And that's where the real key comes from, that we just don't do what we've always done and think something's going to be different, but that we lift up what's working in education, and there are things that are working in education around the country, from early childhood to college, in housing, in career, in partnering with the families, not saving the families, not acting like a social worker on steroids, but saying, I am your partner as you look to change the trajectory for your families. And I tell you, and Susan, I'm going to stop here, our 556 families are all on a continuum of healthiness and dysfunction, like all of us in this room. Many of them have been trapped in generational poverty. But what I keep saying is that I have such hope, because these families are showing up and they're showing out. And I mean in a good way. Because we're not forcing them to go to the parenting education program. We're not forcing them to sign a college-bound commitment as soon as they sign up, but they're doing it, and they're hungry. They're hungry for this region, for this city, to really address the disparities that are happening right in our midst, that we created and that we can change.
It's great. It's great to hear the optimism and the investment strategy. Bill, tell me a little bit about, what do you think from a business perspective? Sandra was talking about some of the best practices. What is the Itasca Project thinking are some of the business best practices here?
One of the things we did as part of the project was went around and talked to some companies, and there are some companies in town that are doing much better than others on this. And what we found, there were really 4 keys to the puzzle. And the 4 keys were, number 1 was to have a business case. And as a business, it's easy to get somebody's attention with a business case. It's a lot harder to get somebody's attention with a moral case, because you're not paying me for the moral case. You're paying me to do my job and to deliver results. So what's the business case? The second one is you've got to have C-level leadership, which means the CEO's got to really want it to happen. The third is you have to build cultural competency inside the organization so that when you actually make some progress, people succeed. And the fourth is you've got to have the tactical initiatives. What's your strategy for actually reaching out and finding people that look different than you have? And so at the Itasca group, the challenge is it's pretty straightforward to think about doing that. The great thing at Thrivent, and some of you have heard me say this before, our company is an incredibly diverse organization representing all flavors of Lutheran. All of them covered. And this is a true fact. We are 98.2% white, and so we perfectly reflect the market that we serve. We do not accurately reflect the market of people that go to church every Sunday, which is the folks we want to serve. And so as we think about what we need to do, the good news when you come 30 years late to the party is it's a pretty straightforward path you got to run down to do better. And the challenge is, how do you do it at a region? And I think, the business case to me is exactly what Rapah said, is if we don't, we got real problems. I mean, we have to solve the $35 billion question. Or as a region, we're really in trouble. I think we do have some C-level leadership from folks like the Met Council, and exciting to see both mayors address this as part of their kickoffs this year. I don't know how we build cultural competency in this region, and I think that is a really big challenge. I think schools have a role to play. I think churches have a role to play. I think businesses have a role to play. But I think if we don't really start to work on that one, the tactical initiatives aren't going to work. And I think that would continue to be a big challenge, and I'm not sure exactly what the path forward is, but that seems to me to be a missing piece that we're going to have to tackle. And it's not easy. I mean, I think anybody who's done any of those, the IDI or any of the cultural assessments, knows that almost 100% of the people think they're more culturally competent than they are. And that would have been true for us, including, people who've been thinking and working on this. So I think that to me is the challenge. And as a company, where we need to do work is we need to reach out and connect a community. Because when we go looking for people, we get people that look like us. We don't get people that don't look like us. So we have to get to the tactical initiatives. But before we do that, we're working really hard right now on cultural competence. So.
That's great. Thank you so much on that. And Rapah, how about what are some of the best practices that you think about how do we engage communities in decisions about how we invest in not only in their neighborhoods but in the region overall? And how do we do that better?
So let me make a comment, just following up on some of the things that I think inspire me and I think are critical to any sustainable anchored change that can occur are examples that I think are existing now. One, there is a large group of leaders, political, philanthropic, nonprofit, public, that are working together in integrated ways, have been for the last 3 years under what was called Corridors of Opportunity, and now the Partnership for Regional Equity. This idea of looking at the region as a whole, across jurisdictions, across areas of focus, I think is a critical part of how we move forward. The other is that when I think about this, oftentimes what's missing is a framework and a roadmap and some infrastructure for how you get to where you're trying to go. As we speak, and you mentioned it earlier, Sue, the Met Council is rolling out Thrive MSP 2040, accompanied by a fair housing equity and a fair housing and equity assessment tool that will inform it about where those RCAPs are and where there's possibilities for different kinds of investments. I think a bold effort in that would be to overlay equity throughout that process. I think, again, oftentimes we talk equity in abstract, but here's a platform and a framework for beginning to test out practice. And I want to just touch on the best practice piece, because I don't know if there is all best practice. I think about 30% of what we do is innovation and trial and error and discovery. And then about 40% of what we do is good practice. We've learned enough to practice some things over because it gets us somewhere. And we can get some platform around principles, basic practices, but the rest has to be targeted and customized. And then the last 30% you can glean off as best practices. Those are things that we know if we do them over and over and over again with the same ingredients and the same process, we get the same results. And we have to make room for all three of those if we're to make big changes. The last piece that I would just add to this, has to do with community engagement. What we have in this region now is a community engagement infrastructure that did not exist 3 years ago. You can scan the region and you have people from different cultural and ethnic and geographic backgrounds and experiences coming together in coordinated ways, bringing that knowledge to the table in ways that they've never brought it before. That didn't exist 3 years ago. And so those things together, a broad framework, some good practical tools, and a way of engaging and bringing people to the table in ways that have traditionally been unrepresented and disconnected are gifts. And if we don't figure out how to tap that and maximize it, we would have lost a huge opportunity. I think that to your question about best practices, given what I said about best practices, I think any time we should vision together. Anytime we plan, we should plan together. So people should be engaged early. People should not just be engaged for input. People should be engaged for benefit as well. So if I'm engaged, why not position me so that the businesses that evolve, the home ownership, the choice housing, the contracts, that's part of my engagement as well. So it goes beyond getting people to the table and weighing in. It's about anchoring prosperity. And when you don't anchor prosperity, you end up where you're at before.
Thank you. That was great. Well, tell me, I have one or two more questions, and then mainly what I'd like to know is, and I think you've touched on it, because I like to end on an optimistic moment, because I think we are more inspired to act when we see opportunity and we see hope. And I do see hope. I see hope in the leadership of the three of you, representing many, many, many people and organizations behind you. But just, why don't we just start with Bill and go on down the line? Just what gives you hope, and what do you hope to see 5 years from now in this community?
I guess what gives me hope is, we were talking before, on Thursday we've got a group of large employers that probably represent, 30, 40,000 jobs in the metro. The CEOs or close to CEOs showing up to talk about how are we going to move the needle, how are we going to create jobs, and how are we going to make sure we fill those jobs in a way that leverages the entire breadth of the metro. That gives me hope, because I think we've diagnosed the problem to death, and I think everybody's, at least a lot of us, are pretty comfortable that we know the problem. The question is, what are we going to do to move the needle? So that's what gives me hope. And I hope one of the things we're trying to do is to actually track our progress as a group. So where are we starting from, and where do we want to be in 5 years? I don't know where we want to be, but we want to be farther towards a more equitable mix of jobs than we are today. So.
Great, good. How about you, Sandra?
Couple things. Our new mayor-elect, well, she's no longer mayor-elect, she's mayor, Betsy Hodges. And Betsy, and really, not to score any points, Betsy's been working on the North Side in partnership with the work that's happening there for over a decade. And so she brings authentic leadership to addressing inequity, because it's the air she breathes. And so that is so cool. And then what's so cool with her leadership and with the leadership of the Met Council also, Sue, is that, people have to get out of their lanes. Before it's like, oh, we got an elected school board, let's not bother that. Oh, we got the Met Council, let's just stick with that. We cannot address these issues if we stay in our lanes, because the problems aren't in one single lane. And ultimately, the thing that gives me greatest hope and wakes me up every morning and rocks me to sleep at night are the 556 resource-poor brown and black families that have committed to a college-bound trajectory for their children and a different life. And they are, I mean, many of them are saying they no longer want to be perennial recipients of social services, but they want to be determinants of their own destiny. And I think they're getting to a place where they will make great partners for any municipality or body that wants to work authentically in community with people who want to see change and are ready to make it happen.
Great, thank you. How about you, Rapa?
Two things I would say. One is I've not, until recently, heard the terms equity and economic competitiveness matched together. That, to me, is a huge step for us, and I think that the two are intricately connected. And the more we understand that, the better off we are in terms of trying to create a region where all prosper. The second piece is that I think we're caught up in a national and a local, but a national as well, energy and movement around equity. That it ain't just up to us. That things are happening around us as well. And as we talk about moving into the future is coming right at us. And the space in between is getting smaller and smaller every day. And that inspires me because sometimes we need to be bumped. And I think we're in places now and at stages now where we're going to be doing a lot of bumping. And we won't be able to ignore what the bigger environment around us is doing. And as much as that bumping might throw us off a little, I think it also moves us forward, and I'm encouraged by that.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to add a huge thank you to coming out on a cold morning to you. And what I love about what you said is, you know what, this challenge is a challenge that we can solve, but it takes leadership, and every person in this room is a leader. You lead your own organizations, your own work groups, your own cities and your counties and your businesses. And it really is a personal commitment to this that will allow us to succeed as a region. So thank you for being personally committed and for coming out today. So let's give them a huge, huge round of applause. And I forgot to thank one really important group at the beginning today, and that is the staff at the Metropolitan Council who do a phenomenal job. So thank you to the staff of the Metropolitan Council. We have bright, dedicated people, and I know they feel as urgently as I do about this issue. And it takes a sense of personal leadership and urgency for us as a community to be able to think regionally but act equitably. Thank you for coming. Now I have two other things. Go to our website and look at Thrive MSP 2040 if you haven't, and get the summary of the Fair Housing and Equity Assessment that we have with you today up at the desk as you leave if you didn't, or go to our website to get it as well. And thanks for being a part of a region and our leadership.